All right, the second type of passive transport is going to be osmosis. We finished looking at the first one, which was diffusion. Osmosis is diffusion, but it's diffusion of water. All right, where the other example we looked at with diffusion, we were kind of mainly focusing on air, and we were focusing on particles in the air and how it diffuses through air. Osmosis is specifically focused on diffusion, but diffusion of water, and how water can move across a cell membrane. It has to do this, and it does it all the time, to help the cell maintain balance with its internal environment and its external environment. And it's osmosis. It's that movement of water, and it's happening all the time to keep equilibrium in play. Now, there can be different states at which water is moving through the cell membrane. You can have, at any given time, you can have too much water inside the cell. You can have too much water compared to the inside outside the cell, so there can be more water outside the cell than inside the cell. Or you can have an equal balance of water equally moving in and out of the cell. So these terms we're about to look at kind of talk about that. If you have an isotonic state, or if your cell is in an isotonic state, that means that there's the same concentration of water and nutrients outside the cell as there is inside the cell. Okay, so as water is moving in and out, there's an equal amount of concentration of materials or molecules inside the cell and outside the cell. It's in an isotonic or balanced state. Okay, now you can get a type of state where there's more molecules that are in a water solution that are located outside the cell. Okay, then you can have inside the cell. So, for example, if you remember the pictures that we looked at in the last video, those color molecules and how they can move across the cell membrane. If you have more outside the cell than you do on the inside the cell, then the cell is going to be considered in a hypertonic state or hypertonic solution. And then vice versa. If you have too much of something inside the cell versus outside the cell in its environment, then the cell is going to be in a hypotonic state or hypotonic solution. Let's look at some examples. Look at some pictures. Those always help. If you look at these two pictures, or this picture, okay, here is your... Alright, so like I said, you can see the membrane in this picture. You can see the water level is the same, okay, on both sides of the membrane, but here you have these molecules, and there are more molecules on this side than there are on this side. Okay, so that's going to show when that happens, the water is going to move more towards this side to balance out the water ratio with the molecule ratio. And this is when you get, if this is a higher side, then you get hypertonic, and this side is going to be hypotonic. Let's look at another picture. I like this picture a little bit better, showing hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solutions. For the hypotonic, okay, if there's more water moving into the cell to balance out the amount of solution in the cell versus outside the cell is going to swell until it reaches a point of bursting, and that's called lysing if that happens. Okay, same thing for the plant cell. You get a turgid structure when more water is moving into the plant cell to balance out the solvent that's in there versus the outside the cell. It's going to swell. That's hypotonic. In an isotonic solution, you get equal amounts of water moving in and out of the cell because there's equal amounts of solution outside the cell versus inside the cell. Same thing with the plants. Okay? And then hypertonic solutions, you have a larger concentration of solution outside the cell, and so water is going to move out of the cell to try to balance that concentration. And so as water is moving out, less water is moving in, and so you get a hypertonic because the cell is going to shrivel. So in a hypotonic, there's more solution inside the cell, so more water is going to move in, causing the cell to swell. In isotonic, there's equal amounts of water moving in and out because there's equal amounts of solution on the inside and outside. That's a balanced state. And then your hypertonic, there's more water moving out of the cell because there's more solution outside the cell, causing the cell to shrivel. So best type of example I could think of to give you when comparing these three states of solution states for a cell. Okay, the third type of passive transport, and we looked at diffusion, we just looked at osmosis. Now there's something called, alright, so this third type, facilitated diffusion, what you're using in facilitated diffusion is you're using a protein channel. Right, you're using one of those channel proteins embedded within the cell membrane. What's happening is you have large molecules that maybe can't pass through the cell membrane through osmosis or through diffusion. However, they still don't need energy to move them because they're moving from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. They're moving down that concentration gradient, so they can just pass through a channel protein, no problem, doesn't need energy. That's facilitated diffusion. Okay? Facilitated diffusion is going to use a type of channel protein that's going to help facilitate the movement or the diffusion of that molecule down the concentration gradient. So it's still diffusion. It still doesn't use energy. It's just the molecules might be too big to pass through without help. And so they'll just use a protein channel. They'll pass through the channel. Still don't need energy because it's moving from higher concentration to lower concentration, just like the smell of the pizza is moving from the concentrated pizza in the pizza box all the way through the back, all the way to the back of the room. It's just using, in this case, it's using help. Okay, now there's different types of facilitated diffusion. You can use ion channels. Ions are charged particles. Okay, and so ion channel is a type of protein that is polarized, and it allows charged or polar molecules to pass through it. Okay, for example, potassium, an ion of potassium, that would be this example, or of ion of chlorine, of ion of sodium, ion of calcium. These charged particles, sometimes cells need those charged particles for whatever purpose, and to move those charged particles through the cell without using energy, they're going to use facilitated diffusion, and they'll use an ion channel. They'll use an ion protein channel, okay, that allows those charged particles to move through.